I told you that we have way more control over cancer than we once thought? And apparently, it all comes down to how our body processes food. Meet Dr. Thomas Seyfried. He's one of the top cancer experts who's shaking up the way that cancer survivors eat and live their lives. His research has uncovered something groundbreaking, that cancer thrives on two things, sugar and glutamine. And this challenges everything we thought we knew about treating cancer. Instead of just attacking cancer cells with chemo or radiation and hoping for the best, Dr. Seyfried's approach is to starve cancer cells to death by controlling our metabolism. So if we can essentially cut off its fuel supply by changing the way we eat, doing intermittent fasting, and using metabolic therapies, we can have a much better shot at preventing cancer or beating it for good. Now, you may have seen Dr. Seyfried on YouTube before, but let's be honest, he dives deep into some heavy science and uses words you may never even heard of, leaving you like, okay, great, but what the heck is a mitochondria? I know it's easy to zone out when things get too technical. I'm going to try to explain this new way to fight cancer in a way that makes sense, and more importantly, I'll show you what you can do right now to start training your metabolism and help to keep your cancer in remission. In case you don't know me, I'm Sarah, and on this channel, I help cancer survivors stay in cancer remission with easy-to-follow advice. So if you want to help other cancer survivors, all you have to do is subscribe to this channel so that the YouTube algorithm knows that people are finding it helpful, and I'd be forever grateful. So Dr. Seyfried points out one major factor that can increase your risk of having cancer come back: insulin resistance. Now you may be thinking, isn't insulin resistance something diabetics have? Or maybe you're wondering, how do I know if I have it? And what does that have to do with cancer? Great questions. Unfortunately, insulin resistance is something you can have for years without even knowing it, and it's not only eating too much sugar that can cause it. So let's start breaking all of that down before we can get into how to get rid of it. Think of insulin as a key. Its job is to unlock the door to your cells so that they can take in the sugar from your bloodstream and use it for energy. But if you're insulin resistant, that key stops working so well. So instead of being able to use sugar for energy, that sugar stays in your bloodstream and your pancreas keeps pumping out more and more insulin to compensate. And that's where it gets dangerous, because cancer cells love sugar more than any other food. They use it as their main source of fuel to grow and multiply and spread. So the more insulin you have floating around in your body, the more fuel cancer cells have. But how do you even know if you're insulin resistant? Well, the bad news is that you can be insulin resistant without even knowing it for years. The warning signs are usually pretty subtle at first, and then gradually get worse until they show up in a blood test as pre-diabetes or type 2 diabetes. And by the time you're diagnosed, the damage has already started. But the good news is that you can reverse insulin resistance before it becomes a serious problem, or even after it becomes a serious problem. So how can we catch it before it gets too far? Well, that's why it's great that you're watching this video, because it's crucial to recognize the early warning signs of insulin resistance and that you don't ignore them. So here are some of the big red flags that it's creeping up on you. Number 1, you often have strong cravings for sugar or carbs. If you feel like you just need them to get through the day, that's a major clue. Number 2, if you have stubborn belly fat that just won't budge, no matter how much you diet or exercise, your midsection just doesn't seem to shrink. Number 3, brain fog. If you constantly struggle to stay focused or you're forgetful, this is a big one. If you've ever been told that you have high blood sugar levels or even that you're pre-diabetic, take it very seriously. Having diabetes significantly increases your cancer risk or your risk of recurrence by a lot. And warning sign number 5, this is another important one. If you're always thirsty or hungry, even after eating, this could mean that your cells aren't getting the energy from the food you're eating that they need, so your blood sugar is likely off balance. Now, if any of these signs sound familiar, don't panic. You can fix this by changing the root cause of the problem, your diet. You're likely eating foods that trigger insulin resistance, and maybe even without knowing it. If you're a cancer survivor, you've worked hard to regain control over your health. But imagine beating cancer only to find out that what you're eating every day could be increasing your chances of having it come back. Not good. And that's the reality for many people who unknowingly have insulin resistance. So as I mentioned earlier, it's not just about cutting out sugar or desserts. One of the biggest offenders of insulin resistance is actually anything made with white flour, like white bread or white pasta, pizza or bagels. I know they're delicious, but they can spike your blood sugar levels almost as fast as eating a spoonful of sugar. And I mean, obviously sugar itself is another main contributor of insulin resistance, but it's not just candy, desserts, or soda that are dangerous. It's also the sugar hiding in less obvious places. It hides in almost all processed foods, even the ones that don't necessarily taste sweet, like chips, salad dressing, or cereal. Even very small amounts of sugar can give you a huge insulin spike without you even realizing it, making you hungrier, more tired, and more insulin resistant over time, leading to type 2 diabetes. Now, what people typically tend to do when they become diabetic is they turn to sugar-free artificial sweeteners for their sugar fix. This is a big mistake. They also mess with your insulin levels because they trick your body into thinking that sugar's on the way, making your insulin spike anyways. Okay, so although eating less sugar and refined carbs is one of the best ways to lower your insulin resistance, I don't want you to feel overwhelmed and think that you have to give up everything you love eating and never have a cookie again. If you can eat whole foods like fruits, vegetables, whole grains, and lean meat around 80 to 90% of the time, you can still enjoy the occasional treat without causing insulin resistance. And there are other things you can do at the same time to become less insulin resistant even faster. One of the easiest ways is to eat more fiber, at least 25 to 30 grams a day. Fiber is a carbohydrate, but unlike refined carbs like white bread, it doesn't spike your blood sugar. Instead, when you eat foods high in fiber like whole grain bread, quinoa, or beans, they slow down the release of glucose into your bloodstream, so it prevents your insulin from spiking and helps your cells use these carbs for energy. And the best thing about fiber is that it also feeds the good bacteria in your gut. This is another effective way to lower insulin resistance and inflammation. I have another video on the best types of fiber to lower inflammation after cancer, which I'll link for you below to watch next. Another easy way to lower insulin resistance is to eat more healthy fats. Fats from foods like nuts, avocado, or olive oil. When you combine healthy fats with carbs, it slows down how quickly your body digests them, so instead of a sugar rush followed by a food coma, you get a more steady energy release. So if you really want to lower your insulin resistance fast, combine high fiber foods with healthy fats. For example, avocado on whole grain toast, or a kale salad with olive oil and nuts, or grilled salmon, another great source of healthy fat, with high fiber veggies like broccoli. Okay, so now that we know which foods will either make or break your ability to become less insulin resistant, don't hate me, but something just as effective is exercise. I know exercise can sometimes feel like a 4-letter word, but even a little bit can make a huge difference. You don't have to train for a marathon. Even just taking a walk around the block helps. In fact, walking after a meal can lower your blood sugar levels by 30 to 35%. Plus, exercise is just so great for your mental health too. Something most people don't realize is that when your stress levels are high and your body's pumping out stress hormones like cortisol, this can make your insulin resistance worse. I mean, let's face it, life can be stressful. We have jobs, families, bills, all the things. But chronic stress is really bad for your insulin levels. But since one of the most effective ways to lower stress is with exercise, it's a win-win. Now, according to Dr. Seyfried, you can also beat insulin resistance using things like the keto diet, intermittent fasting, and certain metabolic therapies. I'm saving those for part 2 of this series because I've already given you a ton of information in this video to think about and to hopefully start implementing. Just remember, you don't have to be pre-diabetic or have diabetes to have insulin resistance, and you can have it for quite some time before you start to notice symptoms. But the bottom line is that it is reversible, and by making these changes to your diet and going for more walks after dinner, you're not just improving your energy and metabolism, you're preventing cancer recurrence. So in video number 2, we're taking it a step further because if you really want to supercharge your metabolism and cut off cancer's fuel supply, changing your diet alone might not be enough. So we'll get more into Dr. Seyfried's recommendations on using the keto diet, intermittent fasting, and certain metabolic therapies to lower insulin resistance. And by the way, I do know that cutting back on sugar is not easy, so I'm linking a video for you to watch next on the secret to cutting back on sugar after cancer, and I'll see you next week.